All right. So the first thing that I had to do with the piece of footage, okay, is I had to bring it into After Effects and export it out as a sequence. Nuke can read in video files, but it's not very reliable. It's not always quick. So what I did is I went into After Effects and just drug the footage onto my timeline, and then I just exported the entire thing out. You may not know it, but when you go to your export settings and it says, QuickTime Movie H.264, if you've had After Effects, you just choose TIFF sequence. And you make sure, just like when we're in Maya, that it labels it name.number.extension. So when I exported this out, I saved it to this movie sequence folder, and I saved it as two. One of them was a TIFF sequence. So this is my high res, so I let it go at name.number.extension, just like that. And then I exported out a lower res version right here. The high res is for what you would render out. The low res is for what you would typically work with. So when I'm in Maya, I don't want to load a whole bunch of high res TIFFs. I want to load a bunch of low res JPEGs. Right before I'm ready to render, I'll crank it up to the highest setting. Okay? So I always render both of those out. So I ended up with a lot of images, 800 and some images, because I had 822 frames for that. So I brought that into Nuke, and I just hit the R button down here. I found my sequence. Nuke is really cool about, hey, I recognize this as a sequence, and I'm just going to show you the name for that. I'm not going to, like After Effects would do, it would do this, and then you'd have to click on one of those, right? That's stupid. Nuke's not like that. So I went in here, and then I found a good range. I said I had 800 and some frames. I didn't want to track 800 and some frames, so I shrunk it down to, I think, 500 frames. So that's what I did, is I added this frame range. Like I said before, you can hit tab and you just type in what you want and it'll pop up. When I do a frame range, it started me at frame 100 and then went to 600. That's annoying. So then I did a time offset, and that just reset my start time to 0. Just for my own sanity, my start time's at 0. All right, so all of this is just kind of managing stuff. I could have just done all of these two steps here right inside of After Effects. I could have just grabbed the exact clip I wanted and then brought that in here. Instead, I did it in there, just so you can see. I had to undistort, okay? So every camera is going to distort your footage a little bit. The GoPro, if you've ever seen any GoPro footage, it's heavily distorted around the edges, okay? So you have to undistort it. The way that this works, and this, obviously, this isn't an assignment. I just want you to see it because there's a lot of possibilities with this. Typically, what you would do, and I could have done it that day, I just didn't think of it at the time, you take whatever camera you're using and you videotape or take a picture of a grid, so like a checkerboard pattern. And what Nuke will do is it'll actually read that checkerboard pattern and see how the distortion's happening on it, and it can undistort it automatically, okay? So that's a smart feature that it has, where it just automatically would do that. Since I didn't do that, I have to say that I am using, thinking, undistort. This brings up some tools here. And what I can do is go to a spot where I see a lot of the lines. I think around 100 I saw a lot of lines. Yes, it's right there. Maybe. Yeah, I guess that's good enough. Anyway, so I take my Add Lines tool. And what I need to do is I need to draw in the lines. So if I go here, and then here, and then here, I'm just trying to get this as close as I can to where that actual line is. And what Nuke's going to do is, I'm going to exaggerate this. Imagine I drew that line that's supposed to be straight, just like this, right? Like a big curve. Nuke would say, okay, well, that's your straight line it's supposed to be. It'll fix it. So in my footage, it'll actually straighten out that piece of that line. So I have to draw enough lines in here that it makes sense. Now, most of the distortion happens right along the edges. So if you have a bunch of stuff in the center, that doesn't really do you a whole lot of good. You have to make sure it's out towards the edges. Okay. So there's one line, and then I would go over here and grab another line. Obviously, because we're working in pixels, you have to be really kind of cautious as to like where you're clicking. And Nuke doesn't like other programs running at the same time it does, so like every time I click, it's just kills me inside. There we go. So I have to be careful as to where I'm clicking. Am I clicking on the top of the black line every time, or am I clicking on the bottom of the black line? And so I'm trying to maintain the top of it. Okay. So now I have two lines here. Nuke still wants more information. So I basically just keep going through, and anything that has a straight edge to it, I need to make sure I click the points. And I'm clicking, it's just not updating because, again, it doesn't like other programs being open. And just so you can see this, if I were to click one point here and then one point there, you don't see it too much on that one. That bench may be crooked itself. Never mind. Let's find something else. That. We'll see if this is any better. Yeah, that's all right there. I'll go really far across, I guess. I'll click on this edge and then that edge there. And you can definitely see how that line has now come away from where that was, right? So I can't just click 2 points. I need at least 3 in there for Nuke to realize, hey, that's what's going on. So I'll just use that. I'll go here. Oops. That. And that. Okay. So once I have this, I'll hit the solve button, and then that's where Nuke goes ahead and undistorts everything. So now my lines are not where I put them originally because it undistorted it. It may have been so quick we couldn't see it, but that's what it did. Again, it's thinking. All right. To prove that it did that, I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to click on this node and just hit D. So you can see that slight shift where Nuke is then popping it out and fixing all that distortion. Okay, so if I were to go back into this tool, so I can add another lens distortion here just so we can see it, change this to undistort, go in with my line tool, and I clicked right here, and I clicked right there. You can see how closer that line is to the other one. Okay, before it was like way off. There's nothing you can do to it. It's just I have to close down every other program. All right, so once I had my distortion done, I went through and did a camera track. And so the way that this works, and this is, you know, After Effects is cool for what it does. It does motion graphic stuff. But what's cool about Nuke is that at any point inside of this tree, okay, this is my tree of how I got to where, you know, I'm demonstrating. I can just make a brand new item and just connect it to that original footage and do something else with it. Okay, if I was in After Effects and I want to try something, I'd have to duplicate the entire comp, move it over, start deleting stuff, start tweaking stuff. It's a big hassle. So this way I can very easily just branch off of there and start doing stuff to this one. All right, if you've never used a camera tracker before, what it's going to do is it's going to throw out 1,000,000 points, a couple hundred points, and then it's going to try to follow all those points per frame. So just so you can see, if there's a high level of contrast in an area, this little crack in the sidewalk, whatever that is, it'll put a marker on it, and then it'll go frame by frame trying to follow where this thing is at. It'll do that throughout this entire image. So everywhere there's a high level of contrast, this guy here, these two guys here, this one, even over there, even stuff that we can't really see or would ever choose, it does. This thing, that thing, okay? And then what it does is it takes all these points, some of them are farther away, some of them are closer to the camera, and as the camera is moving, it's watching all these points. It can actually figure out how the camera moved based off of all these points, okay? So if I say track here, it's going to do that. It's going to take, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. Just so you can see what the tracks are going to do, if I go to my settings and I say preview, oh, I have to view it? Come on, just update so we can see what you're doing. There you go. So these are all the tracks that it's going to do. So it's going to try to follow every single one of these points, every single frame, okay? What that looks like after it's done, and again, it's thinking, why not? Maybe it's not thinking. Oh, I don't have that one on. Now it's thinking. There we go. What it looks like after it's done is something like this, okay? So first it does all those tracks, and then I say, okay, it's good, create a or solve the camera. Figure out how all these points are moving, and then figure out what that camera is doing, okay? So I would say track first, and then I would come down here and say solve. Now you'll see, just like I told you before, by putting in your camera information, it definitely helps. So that is the camera I shot with, so that's the camera information I punched in. I didn't remember the focal length, so I just left it the default setting of unknown. It'll figure it out. Cool. So once it solves it, it actually creates a 3D camera kind of stacked inside of itself. Then I have to say create, and then it actually creates an extra camera that I could then play with. Okay, so that's what this is. This is in Nuke, that's a camera. Okay. Once we have this, then I can connect what's called a model builder. So this looks definitely confusing, but it's pretty simple because when I just turn these off, this is how it's originally created. So my camera's just kind of hanging out. I create a model builder, and SRC is source. There's that. Cam is my camera. There's that. Okay, and then there's geometry if I have other geometry. There's textures if I have textures. I don't. And then I view the model builder. And what this gives me is my camera on a 3D grid. So that as I start moving around, I should shut something, right? Let me do solo on that. Maybe it'll go quicker. There we go. So as I start moving around, you can see how my video is updating. And my camera, this grid plane, my 3D plane, is actually moving around. And it's matching it up pretty good. It's not perfect. I probably have to go in there and tweak it some more, but it's good enough for our demonstration. There we go. Okay. And with the model builder, I can go in here and create a piece of geometry. So I'm going to go and create something right here. Okay. So I make a plane. I move the corners to where I want this to be there. There, and I'm just kind of roughing this in, and there. Notice how after I grab that third corner, how it already started like orienting itself perspective wise. There we go. So now that matches that square pretty good. Now I go up to another frame, let's say 200. There we go. Now I need to update it to tell it where I want this to be. So I just slide this over. It maintained the perspective. It's off a little bit here, so I can tweak that and tweak this. There we go. Then I can go up to, let's say, 300. I can again tweak this some more and go up to whatever this is, 440. That grid is really annoying. I can't even see what's going on. It looks close enough. Okay, but now what I get is this plane that looks like it matches up, and as I hit play, it's going super slow, but it's moving. And it's the cool thing is that it's lined up with that block, and every frame it's going to be lined up with that block. Now that plane itself is not moving. Every time I create that plane, and then I add keyframes, it's updating the camera so that the camera is more accurate. Okay, that's what's awesome about that. Now, this is not a real 3D item yet. Once I come down here to export selected geometry and I say bake, now it makes this, which is a 3D card. Okay. Now, just so we don't get too confused over what everything is over here, I'm just going to start copying and pasting some stuff. So here's my original camera. Here's my card. Just like Maya, we would create a scene, and then we would add stuff to our scene, right? We'd add geometry, cameras, whatever. That's what we do in Nuke. We create a scene. We make a scene. And then we just connect this stuff together. Okay? And then if we want to get something out of that scene, we would render it out. So Nuke has that too. Okay? This is their 3D. Oops, this is their 3D stuff. So we have to add a scanline render in order to see the 3D stuff. So I'm going to drop this onto camera because that's camera. And where this says BG, that's going to be way up here. Oops, there we go. And then I'm going to view this and hit tab. So now I have this black plane that now when I hit play, you'll see how that black plane is actually following where that was. It's actually, the shape of it is moving. It's pretty awesome. All right. So now this is the tracking part that's inside Nuke. So if I had a picture of a dog and I wanted to just make it on that ground, I had graffiti, I wanted it to go on the ground. If I had whatever, I just wanted to go on the ground, it's pretty much done. All I'd have to do is change this card, which is that black piece, and just give this an image. So if I hit R for read and I go and find a picture, I probably have something inside my 2510. I think I have a picture of a monkey. Money room. Textures. Gorilla. Yep, there we go. Boom. So I just connect this image. There's the gorilla right on the ground. And you'll see now as I move around, that gorilla's image is going to stay on that ground. There are a couple frames that are off. I'd have to go back and tweak those, but for the most part, this is pretty much locked on. Now I could also go into this, and just like you would do in Photoshop, I could go and draw masks around things. So I'm not going to spend too much time doing this, but just so you can see the idea of it. It's thinking again. Just pretend that that looks awesome. Just cut it across. Boom. Done. I'll say pre-multiply. So it applies it, cuts it out. Go back to my renderer. There he is. He's on the cement. And so now as I move around, he's stuck on the cement right there. Awesome. Cool. Now, for this kind of stuff, though, I don't typically want to do this. What I want to do is I want to take this out. I want to bring it into Maya because maybe I want to put a 3D item inside it instead of this plane. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to take this scene and I'm going to export this scene out of Nuke and bring it into Maya. So I'm going to go to Write Geometry. And then I'm going to save this here as exported camera.fbx. So FBX, just like OBJ, we sent out an OBJ, brought it into Substance. FBX is a format that allows it to take animations between different softwares. Okay, 2016 worked, so I go to execute, it exports it out. Now I can go into Maya, don't look at that, and I just go to file import, boom, and it brings in my camera, and it also brought in, if I can find out where they put them, oh, I should have brought in my locators. It didn't bring in my locators, I wonder why. Geometry camera lights. Oh, I guess I didn't send it to any point clouds, whatever. But it brought in my camera, which is important, and it brought in my plane, which I hit on this layer. Okay, so then what I do is I grouped both of those items, and I can move them and rotate them and scale them and whatever else to get it to better line up to my scene. Okay. Now to get, did I mess that up? I may have messed that up. Just a little bit. There. All right, that's close enough. Hide that. Okay. So then what I can do is in my camera, I went to View, I went to Image Plane, Import Image. And what that does is it allows me to go and bring in that image sequence. So remember I said I saved a low res and a high res. I go to my movie sequence. That's not it. I go to low res, I click on one of these images, and I hit open. So that brings in one single image. And as I advance time, that image does not update. Once I click Use Image Sequence, then the movie will update. Okay. Now, I have this frame offset. In previous versions of Maya, this actually worked. I think they just decided to break it in this version, so that stopped working. So I have to right-click and say Edit Expression, and I have to add 100 frames here. It's a stupid way to do it. Because I was in Nuke and I offset my frames, I have to offset them here too. So now if we look, go to wireframe so we can see it. You can see how that ball now looks like it's sitting on that piece of sidewalk. Okay. Now to get the lighting in my scene so that it works, I went to Arnold, I went to lights, I created a sky dome. And then on the sky dome, just like we mapped our HDRI before, that's what I did. I clicked on my sky dome, I clicked on the map for color, I loaded in that MCC HDR that we took, turned this off. That automatically set itself to raw, so that's fine. I added my sphere, I added this plane. When I rendered them, they didn't look like that. They look like this. Okay. So two things I had to do. Obviously, one, because I'm working with Arnold, they have to have shaders that work with Arnold. So I assigned a standard surface to this one. And watch what happens when I take my weight down here and my roughness down here and my metalness up here. Nope, my metalness. IOR, there we go. So as I take that up, you can see that now it's reflecting. That's my HDR reflecting into that sphere. Okay. I could also go here. That's what I did before. Like, I remember hitting that many buttons. If I just went to Chrome and said replace, boom, there we go. So now it's totally reflecting that. Now I need to get the shadow. I want the shadow here, but I don't want this plane. Okay. If I just hide the plane, I don't get a shadow. It's just kind of like floating there. I want the plane, or I want the shadow, I don't want the plane. So if I go to assign a new material, inside Arnold there's this thing called a shadow mat. And if I click on it, what it's going to do is it basically says, okay, I'm going to use the shadow from this object, but not actually show the plane. It's pretty awesome. So there it is. So there's a shadow right underneath this. Okay. Now I did add, just for a little bit more effect, I added a second area light, or a second light in here, just an area light, because my sky dome wasn't producing enough of a shadow in my scene. So if I turn this off just so you can see it, you'll see there's not much of a shadow there at all. Okay, so you really barely even see anything. I could add ambient occlusion. That would definitely help kind of pull it off. But I just added this light, and that definitely helps see that shadow a little bit better. I can probably make my light bigger, and that will help soften it up. When you do a shot like this and you're trying to actually match up what your CG item looks like to the rest of the scene, you want to kind of focus in on areas like this where you can see the shadow, see the colors of the shadow, and then use that as your reference for what these ones are going to look like. Okay. I think I did have to also on this, there's a render stat setting. I had to turn off cast shadows because I was getting this weird. It may not do it. There it goes. It was doing this. So because I had this 360 sphere, the bottom of the sphere was casting a shadow upward onto this sphere. So I told it don't cast shadows, and that took care of that. Sweet. Okay. And just so you can see it, Arnold shadow mat. Arnold's user guides, the help files, are 10 times more helpful than any of the Maya ones have ever been. They actually show you, like, okay, here's a typical scenario. Here's how this works. And then here's a bunch of examples of how how those specific things function. And where is it? That's not the one I wanted to click on. I wanted the shadow map one. Oh, there it is. I clicked on the wrong link. There it is. So they show you here, here's all the different options. Here's what each one of these buttons will do inside of there. So here's what shadow color does. It changes the color of the shadows. Here's what the shadow opacity does. Here's what the background does. Here's what this does. Okay? So their help files are extremely awesome. If you do ever get to a point where you're like, I don't know what this specific thing does, go to their help files, because most likely they have an example of with it, without it. And that was 10 times more handy than having to wait to render all your stuff out. Okay? Sweet. So then I could take this and I could render it out, and I could put it inside of After Effects or whatever and make a movie of it. I'll just save this in case I ever need to reference it back.